In 2019, the Baltimore Ravens offense was one of the best in the NFL. Their running game was basically unstoppable. Offensive line was one of the best in the league. Lamar Jackson rushed for over 1,000 yards and passed for the most touchdowns in the NFL with 36. And he won the MVP unanimously that year. But ever since then, the offense has been in decline, and in 2022, it reached its lowest points. After starting the season with 3 straight games over 200 yards passing, they only hit 200 yards passing 3 other times in the regular season. And before their bye week, they only had less than 20 points in the game once. After the bye, the rest of those games, only one did they reach over 20 points. So what happened to this Ravens offense that caused the decline like this? Well, that's what I'm going to go over today in this video. What's going on, guys? Diggs Report here, back to you with another video. And before I continue, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. Now, on with our video. On the surface, the Ravens offense in 2022 was middle of the pack. Literally, they finished 16th in total yards. However, that was helped by a rushing game that finished 2nd in the NFL, whereas the passing game finished 28th. And like I had mentioned before, after week 3, they only hit 200 yards passing in the regular season 3 times. And they also hit it in the playoff game against Cincinnati. However, their passing game struggled, and it kind of let this offense down a lot during the season. So, what happened? Why did this offense struggle in the passing game? Well, that brings me to my first point, the receivers. Now, the tight ends were great as usual. Mark Andrews is still one of the best tight ends in the NFL. And the Ravens found a gem in the 4th round with Isaiah Likely. Likely looks like a star in the making, and when Mark Andrews went down at points during the season, he stepped up and showed that he can be a number 1 tight end. However, the receivers, not so much. It all started on draft night when the Ravens traded Hollywood Brown to the Arizona Cardinals for a 1st round pick. Now, that 1st round pick turned into Tyler Linderbaum, who looks like he'll be a Pro Bowl center in the next few years. So, in the end, it might have worked out, but as far as this season went, the receiving corps really struggled without Hollywood. And they didn't draft a receiver at all. They did bring in Demarcus Robinson, who I will get to later, but they were expecting Rashad Bateman to take the next step in his 2nd year and become the number 1 receiver. Well, early on, he showed that he could be a number 1 in this league. Now, he only had 8 catches through the first 3 weeks. However, he had almost as many yards as Hollywood Brown did with the Arizona Cardinals through the first 3 weeks on fewer catches. Brown had over twice as many catches as Bateman, and Bateman almost had as many yards. However, Bateman hurt his foot. He did come back, but then he had to have surgery, so he was lost for the season after the Buccaneer game. With him down, Demarcus Robinson did step up, taking over games at points, but he can only do so much. He's not a number 1 receiver in this league. He's a better number 2, number 3 option. And the tight ends could only do so much, with Andrews, Likely, and even Josh Oliver had his moments. Now, what about the rest of the receivers? Well, Devin Duvernay was expected to step up after Bateman went down. However, Duvernay struggled in his new role. After Bateman got hurt, he only had more than 3 catches in a game 3 times. And twice in those games, he was held to under 10 yards a catch. It's not a good look. Also, in a 4-game stretch, Tampa Bay, New Orleans, Carolina, Jacksonville, Duvernay had as many catches as Demarcus Robinson had in 1 game. And Robinson had more yards as well. Duvernay just doesn't fit that role. He's better as a complementary piece than a guy that's, well, one of the starting receivers. What about James Prochet? At one point, he was called a breakout candidate. He had 8 catches the entire 2022 season. It got so bad that they were bringing in guys like Deshaun Jackson, Sammy Watkins, and Anthony Isabella to help this receiving corps. And Jackson actually had more catches in half as many games than Prochet. The receiving corps struggled. And it kind of ties into my next point, the red zone offense. Baltimore's red zone offense was actually not bad during the first half of the season. In fact, they were 12th in the NFL before the game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They had a 58% conversion rate, meaning that they got touchdowns 58% of the time. Again, they were 12th in the NFL. And that was right up there. With 2020, they were 14th with a 60%, while in 2021, they were 15th at a 59. However, towards the end of the year, it got very bad, to the point where they fell all the way down to 30th with a 44% conversion rate. That was only higher than the Jets and the Patriots, and we all know the struggles that those two teams had throughout the entire season. Things got so bad against Jacksonville, they went 2 for 6 in the red zone. And one of those was the drive that they needed to take the lead. Keep in mind, they lost by 1 point, and it took the Jaguars a 2-point conversion to beat them. If the Ravens had converted even one of those field goals to touchdowns, they win that game. And they don't need that touchdown drive to take the lead late. That's how close they were. The red zone offense just struggled late in the season. They kept having to go for field goals instead of touchdowns, or they just turned the ball over. Like the game against Cleveland. They had a chance to either take the lead or tie the game. But they threw an interception, and Cleveland went down and scored a touchdown on that drive. Cleveland won by 10. That's at least a 10-point difference. That's how close some of these games were for Baltimore. But it wasn't just the red zone offense that struggled. It was also in the fourth quarter. Which brings me to my next point. The fourth quarter offense. I looked up every single fourth quarter drive that the Ravens had in their losses. And the results I found were shocking. 3 times did a drive end the game. Either they ran out of time or they missed a field goal. 5 times did they either have to punt or they had a turnover on downs. 7 times they turned the ball over. 4 times, it was a 3 and out. Twice they had to go for a field goal, and 3 of them ended in touchdowns. And 2 of them came on the same game, Jacksonville. Keep in mind, these are only the losses. I didn't take a look at the wins. But those results are shocking, to say the least. They turned the ball over more in the fourth quarter in a loss than they had any kind of score, either a touchdown or a field goal. That is not a recipe for success. It puts your defense in a terrible situation. And that's part of the reason why they lost a lot of those games. Because their defense was put in bad situations and they had to make plays when the offense just couldn't finish the game. Miami was a key example of this. Yeah, the defense wasn't at its best, but the offense didn't do them any favors. The offense just could not move in the fourth quarter against Miami after they had dominated the Dolphins the entire game. But that's not what sticks in my mind. What sticks in my mind is the drive against the Steelers late in the season, where they had the ball at the Steeler 40 to start the drive after Justice Hill had an amazing return. All they needed was 5 to 8 yards, and they are in Tucker's range, and they get a field goal. But what happened? A 2-yard loss where they ran towards TJ Watt, which is never a good idea, and then 2 incomplete passes, and they had to punt. Baltimore lost by 3 points. If they had at least gotten a field goal on that drive, then that game goes to overtime. Again, that's how close they were. When you are consistently putting your defense in bad situations, either turning the ball over, having 3 and outs, or just not taking advantage when the opportunity is there, no wonder you are having trouble finishing games. It just isn't a recipe for success. Now, my last point emphasizes this greatly. Play calling. Now look, I understand. Not every single play call is going to be amazing or great. There are going to be questionable calls. But there are questionable calls, and there are just downright awful calls. And Greg Roman had more downright awful calls than I could count for this year for the Ravens. Why don't we start off with what happened in Denver? James Prochet pass. I know Ravens fans just do not want to hear it, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. The Ravens were driving against Denver. This was the best drive they had all game. A chance to either cut the lead or take the lead. And they go for a reverse wide receiver pass that ends in an interception in the end zone. Now, we've seen this happen a lot where you try to trick somebody. However, I looked it up. James Prochet has never had to do a situation like this. Not one thing did I find that he was either a quarterback at one point or had experience throwing the football. And when you do this, you normally have someone that is either a former quarterback, whether it's high school, college, maybe started out as a quarterback in the NFL, I don't know. Or somebody that just has experience doing this and that has a decent arm. But Prochet didn't have the experience. So he throws it into double coverage, and of course, it became an interception. It just seemed like they came up with that play on the fly and just went with any random receiver. It was not good when it happened at first, and it looks even worse when you think back on it now. In the playoff game against Cincinnati, they had a 3rd and 1 where they decided to run Mark Andrews. The sad part was, the offensive line did their job on that play and opened up a hole. The problem is, Mark Andrews is not a running back, he's a tight end. So of course he doesn't know how to read a hole, and they don't convert it. Why they didn't go with either Dobbins or Edwards just confuses me. On that play, they could have had a big gain if they went with one of their running backs. And speaking of their running backs, J.K. Dobbins gets a touchdown early in that game, in the red zone. And then they don't use him again. They do a quarterback sneak at the 1 yard line, or a little over the 1 yard line, and it ends up being a fumble recovery for a touchdown for the Bengals. And that was the difference in the game. Imagine if Baltimore had scored a touchdown there. Who knows what could have happened? They could have won that game. They really did outplay the Bengals in that game, but because of that mistake, they lost the game. And they couldn't score again after that. To also bring back to then just abandoning Dobbins and even Gus Edwards, how about the Cleveland game? In the 4th quarter, those two combined for 1 touch. And yes, they were down by 10 points, but they didn't have to abandon the run as early as they did. It was just so confusing why they didn't use those two. In a situation like that, down by 10, you want to use your playmakers, especially ones that have been moving the ball the entire game. They didn't do that. They just kept throwing the ball, and shockingly, it didn't work. And again, I know they were down by 10, but there was still plenty of time for them to be running the ball, and they were getting big plays. One big play in the running game, it's a different ball game. And it wasn't just those calls that I just talked about. There were many others that just made you go, what the heck were you thinking? And again, it was just them not using their playmakers in critical situations. It just seemed like Greg Roman and, who knows, maybe even Harbaugh, I don't know. I don't know what was going on with the offense. It just seemed like they didn't want to put the ball in their playmakers' hands in critical moments of the game. I talked about the 3rd and 1 situation in the playoffs and the red zone situation with the quarterback sneak. But why are you not letting your playmakers do what they do best? It just confused me beyond everything. So what happens now with this Ravens offense? Well, Greg Roman's now gone. Todd Monken is now the new offensive coordinator. And with what he did at the University of Georgia, and this guy has been in the NFL before, I kind of feel good about the Ravens' chances to really get better. But what about the receiving corps? Well, John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta talked about that. They are committed to revamping this receiving corps, as they should be, because it might have been the worst receiving corps that we have seen in at least the last 20 years. But what's going to happen with Lamar Jackson? That's the big story. Are they going to be able to re-sign him to a long-term deal? Are they going to have him play on the tag? Or are they just going to outright trade him? Nobody knows what's going to happen there. And really, that's a video for another day. This Ravens offense just was not good towards the end of the season. And really, it was questionable to start off the year anyway. Lots of questions. And unfortunately, the Ravens gamble just did not pay off. But hopefully they have learned their lesson and this offense get back on track in 2023.